I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm pretty sure before we're even recording that this is going to be like a top hit on the show.
Good. I
It
like that.
it is a really hot topic. We
Mhm.
talk a lot about navigating your 20s, post grad, even college a little bit. I'm
Right.
kind of like past that, but
Right.
we're constantly talking about friends. I think it's really hard to make friends in your 20s.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you're kind of navigating old friendships
That's
and
right.
maybe growing apart or maybe
Mhm.
reconnecting. And it's very confusing sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 20s are so exciting and there's so much going on and there's so much change. And
Yes.
you're really crossing a threshold into adulthood in a way that like it's not about turning 18. This is when most people start to think about career and adulting a little bit more and responsibility. And with that, implicit within that is having to make choices in an ideal world. Most of the time we don't make choices. We just kind of keep all of our friendships going. But in a perfect world, making choices around what are the best friend relationships to help support you through the change, and then when you've arrived on the other side of that, kind of manifesting who you wanna be and who's the A team, who's your, starting lineup of the friendships in your lives that can help support you. And what we don't do is actually think like that at all. And
Yep.
so that's kind of that's kind of one of the main genesis of the book, is really drawing awareness to this group of people, this relationship group that doesn't get a lot of analysis or thought, and yet that's a total missed opportunity because friendships have the ability to really, really, cultivate greatness in your own life. They help you be supported and seen in a way that you want to be supported and seen, but that only can happen if uh you're really looking at the landscape of the friendships in your life and then making active choices around your needs.
So how do you start to evaluate your friendships?
Well, it's so I mean, this is a very little thing, but there's a litmus test I like to kind of talk about, which is the cell phone litmus test, which is like your cell phone rings and you see XYZ's name come on. What is your gut reaction? Are you like, or are you diving to get the phone, right? And we do it all day long. We see people and we have these visceral responses, but we don't pay attention to them, right? And so I talk about the starting point in the book of just taking a piece of paper and a pen and writing down everybody that's kind of in the inner circle and then maybe the second tier of your life and just watch your body reaction, your mind reaction to just seeing their name come in front of you. What is the initial kind of response? There's so much information in that. And so you're either going to have an irritation or frustrated. You might feel great joy. When I did this, I felt like I missed some of the people that were in my life, even though we were actively hanging out. So I was like, what's that all about? And then worst of all is you have no reaction. You're kind of numb and you see the person's name. This is all really good information. And it's a starting point to be like, okay, definitely don't want to be here or here or here in this relationship. How did we get here? Do I still want to commit to it? And if so, how can we do it in a way that makes me feel excited and alive to engage with the person as opposed to like frustrated or nothing at all? And but to back it up even further, so that's actually like an actionable thing you can start doing.
Mhm.
But, as I talk about in the book, the starting place, and it feels counterintuitive because friendships are obviously relational, but the starting place of how to have really good relationships, friendships in your life is you, and really understanding what your needs are currently, right? And a lot of times when we look at like legacy friendships we've had from high school or middle school or even some in college, how those relationships were important for us then might not be what we need right now. And so you really need to be able to answer four fundamental questions, which is who am I? Where am I? How did I get here? And where do I want to go? And
Right.
until you can answer those questions, and this isn't something you just think off the top of your head, you have to spend some time with yourself really understanding the answers to those questions. Until you can feel confident answering those questions, it's really hard to assemble the relationships in your life that are going to be giving and supportive, right? We're kind of out there swinging blindly, just keeping these people in our lives without really understanding what our fundamental needs are. So the starting place is yourself, and then you look out and say, okay, now who's in my world, and does it still make sense that they're here? And what are the holes? And who do I and where do I need to go out and fill, like, some of these, what am I missing here?
If you have a friendship that you know is no longer good for you,
Mhm.
um, how would you recommend, like, breaking that off? Do you think there needs to be a conversation? Do you think sometimes things fizzle out? Like, how do we best navigate that?
It really depends. So here's the thing. Every relationship, every person is so complicated and nuanced, right? When you put them in relationship with another person, it's not double the complexity. It's like 1,000 times the complexity, right? So that's the kind of caveat to what I'll say because you really do have to look at the specifics in any one situation, but you have to analyze the length of the friendship, the real importance of the friendship, like how valuable was this relationship to you historically? So it doesn't mean it's obviously not that valuable right now, but was it? Did it play a major part in forming who you are and being there for you through times of need, celebrating big milestone? Like how important was that relationship? And what is the personality of the other person? So in a perfect world, and this is assuming that this is a long-standing and has been historically an important relationship, you're gonna wanna try and have either an face-to-face or a phone call, with the person, and that's the courageous move, and that's the scariest move, but that's the move that is I think gives the relationship the most respect and the other person on the other side of this relationship. The only time I would say not to do that is if the person in the relationship is extremely defensive, extremely reactive, is, you know, if there's any sort of hostility, right? Because the goal is when you're talking to the person and communicating why this friendship needs to, you know, go away, um, or shift gears backwards in your life, however you wanna kinda phrase it, um, is for you to be able to communicate the way you're feeling and for that to land with the person. And so if the other person is very defensive or reactive, what ends up happening is they feel that they're being confronted, they don't hear anything that you're saying, and they kind of project it right back onto you. And so you get off the phone, there's a lot of emotion, and none of the information has really been able to be distilled by the other person. So in that case, I would say write a very thoughtful and thorough email so that the person can have that defensive reaction and then come back to it with a clearer head and at least have takeaways so that they're never left like, "How did that end? How did we get here?" It's like, "Well, it's all right here." And so they feel less defensive because it's not an in-person confrontation. Now, if it is a situation where let's say you've been friends for like, I don't know, since elementary school, and it's just like it's nothing big and toxic, has happened between you, but it's just like we're in different places, um, then there's kind of like just a cadence where you're both kind of like slowly exiting out of this. No, you don't need to say anything. That's just the natural flow of the relationship, and the expectation is the same. You guys are both kind of just like slowly dwindling apart, that's okay. That's just the natural ebb and flow of certain relationships. Where you're gonna wanna say something though in that scenario is if you are like, um, "I'm over this. I'm at a different place in my life," and the other person still keeps trying to engage you, either in plans or starting conversations on social or so in that case, the expectation is not the same. You have one foot out the door and have no interest, not because you have any terrible hard feelings, it's just you've grown in a different direction, but you've got this person that has a different expectation, and they're keeping wanting to engage. In that case, it's better and I don't think you have to have a phone call or whatever, but to be able to communicate, something along the lines of, I have a great respect for the friendship that we've had over the years, but I feel like I cannot meet your needs. I'm in this place in my life, and I feel like, um, just just our expectations in this are not aligned, and I don't wanna hurt feelings, and I don't wanna be frustrating, and I notice that you keep asking me to engage, and I just don't have bandwidth to do that, so I wanted to bring it I just wanted to bring it to the table and say, this is where I'm at and this is my capacity. And I don't have bandwidth or capacity for this in the way we used to. And so, and that's to do yourself a favor because we think like, oh, I'm just going to keep saying no. And I'm going to, and then we start to get frustrated. Why isn't she getting it? She keeps asking me to do something. And I keep saying no, like, when's she gonna get this? And then you have a guilt phase where you're like, oh my God, I keep saying no, but I can't do it. I don't want to. And sometimes then you even say yes just to get past. So think about all of the energy you're spinning and you think like, I'll just let this flow out. That's the easiest way to do it. But it's actually not. When you look and you start calculating the energy you're burning, like the micro moments of guilt, frustration, whatever, it's much better to be able to take the 5-10 minutes to write that message, then, to have this play out over 2 years where like every 4 weeks you kind of when she's trying to engage or he or whoever it is, where you're like, and then obviously on the other person's side, that's very frustrating because they're keeping trying to engage and it's a dead end. And so it's easier to just address these things and take action, right? As opposed to like letting the relationship kind of happen to you. Because often there's like one relationship and you think, oh, there's one relationship like that. But when you really start to look at it, and that's why the analysis piece of the people in your life is so important, there's actually usually like 5 or 6 people that you're doing this with. So that starts to be really meaningful in the amount of energy you're wasting.
Something you should know about me is that I have a hard time
Mhm.
letting go of things.
Okay.
And maybe not letting go is the right word, but like for example, if someone I'm very outgoing, I'm
Mhm.
very friendly, I don't
Mhm.
shut up. Like I was
Right.
just saying, my voice is going away,
Right.
right? I'm always the person who's inviting everyone over. I make the plans. Like I was a social butterfly in the 4th grade. Like I'm a
Right.
very social sort of girl.
Right.
And I really value friendship and I
Mhm.
really value like certain people who have been in my life for a long period of time, which I think can get toxic.
Right.
I don't even like the word toxic, but it
Right.
can.
Well, I talk about that for sure in the book.
Yes, but I think that that is maybe an unhealthy habit that I have.
Mhm.
But on the other end, like I will have a lot of friends, but there's only certain people because I'm so particular about like my closest circle.
Right.
It's hard for me to really it's very rare that I meet someone that I'm like, you're one of my best friends
Mhm.
and like you're going on the trips. So we're going on girls' trips and doing things like that.
Right.
So I do have like more of a boundary with that, but I also have an issue. And I think that's because I know I'm like, I don't want to like let these people go.
Mhm.
But I've also been in friendships where one, I stayed for way too long and like
Right.
either I was not for them or they were not for me.
Mm.
But what I've noticed in my 20s, which I thought was so interesting, was
Mhm.
there were friendships that I was holding on to because they were always there for me in the bad times and the worst times of my
Right.
life.
Right.
And then as I got older and I started to realize like this is kind of weird. They're actually only there for me in the bad times and never in the
Totally.
good. And I
Yes.
always thought that like to be a good friend, you're there in the bad, but you're there for both.
Right.
And I don't know, I was like operating in a lot of
Yeah.
chaos and it was really weird. So how would you recommend me navigating like friendships like that?
Well, it's funny that you bring that up because that it's a great point. So often we look at who was there for me when I was down. And it's true. You need that you need that support, right? But some friends, if you pay attention, almost keep you down. And it
Yes.
starts out as like, "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Let's talk about it." But then 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later, and of course it depends what the drama or the trauma is that you're going through, they're still leading every conversation with that. They're still leaning into the pain and misery, and yet, when you get a promotion or you get a bajillion downloads on your podcast, they're nowhere to be found, and it's really important that you have people that not only lean into your own sense of misery, but are really there to celebrate when, life is very hard, right? And so it is so important, not just in friendships, but across the board, when there is a small victory or, of course, a large victory, that you celebrate that. You take the time to stop, pay attention to it, and ideally, your crew, your main kind of inner circle people are right there with you to cheerlead and congratulate and support you in that way too, right? So really important for when you're doing this kind of audit to look for that. That's like one of the biggest red flags. Is this person only there for me when I'm suffering or going through something? I need to look at that. What's that all about? And, so what I recommend doing, again, let's assume that these are this is a long-standing relationship, okay? You need to look at, was this always the case? Have they always only been there for me? Were they did they used to be kind of across the board and then there was a shift? Yeah, a shift in the relationship? Okay, what was that all about? Do I sense that maybe their career has, kind of plateaued, but I'm doing this and this is much more about their own kind of, their own, feeling, their own self-worth or feeling like they're not accomplished? You know, so it depends, like, if they've never been there for you for more than that, I think it's and you've been friends for a long time, it's hard to change that behavior, right? If that's just been the nature of the relationship. If there is, like, they have supported you in both good and bad for the majority of the relationship, but like in the last couple of years, they've only kind of lived in the misery zone with you, then I think that's worth bringing up with them and saying, "I'm noticing this, and I notice," and the way you can say it is, "And I notice that when I'm celebrating, I miss you being there." And that's what kind of made me stop and think, "Wait a second." And when I look back, I noticed that, like, for the most of our relationship, you have been there across the board, but I noticed a shift starting about whenever you noticed it, like a year ago. Can we talk about this? Is there something going on? Is there something we're going on? A lot of times, if the person has generally been behaving good in the relationship, participating in the relationship in a healthy way, they're unaware of the shift, right? It's not intentional, it's subconscious. They're going through something and they're kind of projecting into your life and they themselves are being miserable. So that's where they want to feel comfortable, right? And that's where they also feel helpful because they themselves are not feeling great. Um, but so drawing awareness to that can actually really change the trajectory of the friendship. And I could be like, "What? Oh, I didn't realize I was doing that." It can have a really positive effect and you guys can get back on the trajectory where things are heading in the right direction. Or you can really tap into something where they get really defensive and angry and it is about something that's going on in their life, but they're aware and it's almost been conscious that they're like, well, I don't know if it's conscious, but at least subconscious, trying to have you stay down there with them. And that's a much worse outcome, right? And that's the type of conversation where if that's the direction where it goes, "Look, I love you, but I can't work through that stuff with you to get this back on track. So until you're willing to kind of take responsibility for where you're at in your own life, you can't show up in this relationship where I need you to show up." And so, doors open for you if you wanna come back and we can talk about this, but I think you need to do your own kind of self-work here for this to have, any sort of future.
Yeah, that's incredible advice. Also, another question I just thought of, this is something I get this kind of feels a little bit juvenile, but I
Right.
feel like it probably happens, like, later in life as well.
Right.
Um, Girls have been sending in, like, what do you do if you're kind of in, like, a group of friends
Yes.
and you love 2 or 3 of them and
Mhm.
they're, like, your best friends, and then some other girls just don't make you feel good about yourself or you just don't like being around?
Right.
How do you navigate a friend group like that?
This is a question I get all the time, and I wish the answer were really simple. It's not. Remember how I just said one
Mhm.
person's really complex, you put 2 in the mix, it's bananas, and then you've got 8?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you just have to do the math on that. Um But I think the first thing is you identify, "Okay, this is what's going on. Every time I show up, this person is either rude or I just don't like what she has to say. I'm not loving her personality in this group anymore." Then you need to say, "Am I in any way contributing to the dynamic with her? Is there something like, am I bringing in anything?" You wanna start with yourself, I think, before casting blame, and really be thorough, like, "Am I seeing something here that doesn't exist, and why am I seeing that?" If you ascertain, like, "No, I just really don't love, like, the energy that she's bringing to either the group or to me within the group," then you kind of have to sit back and look and say, "What," without talking shit with the other people, because that's the worst thing you can start to do is start to try and make allies and pull people on your side. It never ends well when you do that. But when you're sitting back and looking at the dynamic or looking at past interactions or past group texts or whatever, what's the general climate of the group towards this person? And um, if you feel like that they're kind of cooled off towards this person, there might be an opportunity to discuss it. If you feel like it's business as usual and everybody else seems to be really vibing, then you've got a bit of a problem, right? You've got a choice to make. How much is this person bothering you? Um, is it a case where, let's say, fundamentally you have a kind of disagreement on like a philosophy about life or maybe like a political thing, and every time she's showing up, she's saying things that like offend your sensibility of the way, the world should work, right? According to you. Then you can either try and handle it within the group where you start to speak up and say, "Well, actually, I disagree with that." And da 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 da, and see how that lands, because sometimes just that, it's not even pushing back, but standing up and saying like, or addressing like, "Actually, I think you're being rude, and here's why." But you do it in the group context, right? You're not necessarily calling it out separately, and see how that lands. If that doesn't work, right, you have to start to ask yourself, how much do I really want to be in this group? Could I be better served by being friends individually with Sarah, Melissa, and Andrea, one on one? And I kind of step away from this group dynamic, because I don't want this. It just depends how much you're interacting with this group and how much it's bothering you, this person, right? Um, so that's kind of a tricky, it's a tricky thing to answer, because give me a specific. What do you have a specific of, or
Y
these are questions that people have asked you,
Yeah,
right? So it's not for you.
I
Yeah.
can give a specific just for group settings that I really dislike
Yeah.
that I was gonna bring up
Yeah.
anyways. And this makes me I wanna preface this by saying it makes me feel like a horrible person.
Okay.
And
Probably not.
I don't think I mean, okay, I really don't like when girls are talking really negatively about their bodies
Okay.
around I don't wanna be around it, and I haven't even dealt with and I don't mean, like by the way, I don't mean, like, I don't like people are insecure. We're all insecure,
Right.
that's not what I mean.
Right.
But when someone is, like, repeatedly talking so poorly about their bodies
Mhm.
around other people, friends of mine that, like, have dealt with severe body
Right.
image
Right.
issues, and I have not even gotten, like, down that road, and it just something about it, I'm like, I don't like it, and then I'm also like, "You are your 5 best friends, I
Mhm.
don't want my life to
Right.
go down this route,"
Right.
and I feel like a horrible person
Why?
because I'm like I feel bad because they're insecure, and
But that's not
so
your problem.
yeah, I guess I just feel bad voicing it because I feel almost, like, bitchy, but it's like, I don't wanna
Well,
be around
you
that.
have to ask yourself, okay, when you're faced with this kind of dilemma, okay? And I'm glad you brought up this example. Am I gonna choose me, or am I gonna choose her?
Yeah.
Well, you choose you every single time. That's the only way you could ever choose somebody else, right? Is by choosing yourself first. And so if that body negativity is number one, slipping into the subconscious of the collective energy of the group, if it's somehow affecting you negatively in the sense that you're taking on that energy, and you feeling bad about your body, or you feeling nervous that it's affecting somebody else badly in the group. But by the way, that's also not your responsibilities to navigate how somebody else is feeling in the group,
Yeah,
right?
that's
'Cause
true.
that's their own work as well. But it definitely goes against you being a bad person, because you are really thinking about everybody else in that group. But that's a good example of the conversation we kind of just had, in the sense of like talking to that person and saying, "Look, I understand you are feeling insecure about your body. We all have insecurities, just like you said. But I feel like you're bringing it to a level that it feels like you need to do your own work on this. And until you do your own work on this, it feels like it's polluting this kind of the
Yes.
group waters that we have going here. And I'm concerned it's affecting other people negatively in the group. Nobody said that to me, and I know that's not my cross to bear, and that's something I guess I will have to deal with. But I'm just going to call out that I don't want to sit here and feel bad or nervous every time we hang out, that you're going to start shaming yourself, because I don't know how to deal with that. And frankly, the reason I don't know how to deal with that is because you're the only person that can actually really deal with that. And so I'm happy to talk through it with you. I'm not sure if you're just saying these things like as a default thing that now you say, or if you really mean them. But either way, there's a problem to solve here, or to
Mhm.
work on at least, not to solve. And well, ultimately to solve, but to start working on. And I don't think that makes you a bad person, right? You're calling out behavior that is self-destructive, that is also kind of at least just being destructive to the group. And all of these things that I talk about in the book in terms of these friendships being over. And by the way, as you know, there's only one chapter on this book of how to
Mhm.
break up with your friends. There's 9 on the importance of friendship and how to do them better. But when we talk about friendships ending, it's so rarely, as the media portrays it, like one big sabotage where, she stole my man, or she took my job, or whatever. It's so rarely this one big stab. It's much more common than it's death by a thousand cuts, right? It's these little micro misbehaviors that end up growing into a big chasm between people. And so, like, when I hear this story about one of the members showing up and, self-shaming and, disrespecting herself, or however you wanna preface it, that enters into the kind of ethos of that friend dynamic. And again, it's not one big, like, she was an absolute jerk and blew this friend group up, but that kind of thing, interaction over interaction starts blowing the group apart, right?
Yeah.
And that you wanna stop that.
And with that specifically, I find that it just, like, permeates throughout the whole friend group, and then
Exactly.
it gets worse and worse and
That's
worse.
exactly what I'm saying, and it's not
Yes.
some big blunt forced trauma to the
Yes.
relationship. It's this cumulative, just, like, people start to feel bad hanging out together, and you can't, all of a sudden, 2 years down the line, you go, "God, I don't wanna hang out with any of these people." When that's not where it started. The germination started with one person unaware of how their, um, bad behavior, I put that in quotes because it's whatever, their lack of awareness around how they're behaving can spread throughout the friend group, and all of a sudden, there's people not feeling great in this dynamic, and nobody knows how they got there. And so it's really important to call this stuff out, not rudely or disrespectfully. You do it with love and respect, but it's a boundary. You put up a boundary. I just can't participate in this if this is what participating in this means, right?
Mhm.
And and and, yeah, and it's out of trying to save that group relationship because it probably is good, net net, right? But
Mhm.
you wanna protect that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in that setting, let's say it's happening, would you
Mhm,
recommend, like,
mhm.
conversation-wise, like, do you pull this person aside?
Yes.
Okay.
I would not when it's something like that, if somebody's being rude, I think it's fine to say, "Hey, I feel like you're being rude." And you don't have it doesn't have to be an attack, but like, "Hey, I feel like you're being rude." If it's something about, like in this particular case, which it is really self-shaming and self-defeating, you don't wanna call that person out necessarily publicly because it's a vulnerable topic. That to me is much more of a, "Hey, can I talk to you, for a minute?" Like, as you're waiting to leave for your cars, everybody's getting in their car or something like that. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I think that's where it's gonna land the best, right? You don't want the person to be defensive, and if you do that in front of a group, um, that it's not necessary. You don't want other people to then you don't know how the energy of that what you're saying is also gonna be some people in the group could be like, "Hey, hey, I don't feel that way. Hey, hey." So it's really about the way you're feeling within this group,
Okay.
and that's what you're communicating.
Okay, great. So, how would you recommend people make friends in their 20s?
So it's such a difficult time right now, obviously, coming out of COVID, and, like, people are all working from home, and we don't know, like, what the future landscape's gonna be. Is it gonna be hybrid? Are people going back to offices? And why I bring that up is obviously just literally getting out of your house in the morning and going to get a coffee and, walking to your car and then obviously being in an office. You have all these different opportunities throughout the day to meet people. When that's taken away and mostly you're sitting in front of your computer all day, it makes it that much more difficult to, like, just to interface with other humans, right? So you really have to be intentional about it. And much like let's say you're at a phase in your life, you're single and you're like, "Oh, I want to start dating somebody." What do? You tell your other friends, "Hey, I think I'm going to start dating. Do you know anybody?" Whatever. You put yourself out there. Literally, you put the vibes out there. I am single and want to meet somebody. The same should be true, and it feels so weird and counterintuitive, but the same should be true about finding new friendships. "Hey, I actually feel like I have a couple holes in my friend roster, I need somebody in this purpose. I need somebody for this purpose. I need a relationship, I should say, for this purpose and this purpose." Put it out there. Like, if you are starting your first job, right, and it's in, some creative industry, literally saying to friends around you, "Hey, I'm in this kind of new exciting place, but I feel like I don't have anybody that has a shared experience with me. Do you guys know anybody that's in a similar boat? I'd love to connect with them." It's finding ways, first of all, just manifesting and friendships, so putting it out there, and then also really being intentional in the way you're operating in the world. So, like I say all the time, if you have a dog, instead of walking your dog, just walking your dog on the same route every day, go to a dog park, right? You know that there's for sure a group of people there that have at least one thing in common with you. They like dogs. They have dogs, right? And when you're there, look around. Be open. Is there anybody cool here? Is there anybody that I feel like, "Oh, I'm kind of curious about this person?" If so, throw your ball over there, make your way around, and try and strike up a conversation. It doesn't mean like you're gonna be like, "Hey, do you wanna go for coffee right now?" But maybe you'll see them again in 2 weeks when you're there next, when you whatever. But you really need to put your energy out there. You like to jog? Great. Stop going in the same 4-mile radius that you do every time. Find a jogging club. Doesn't mean you have to do it every time you go jogging, but again, you're putting yourself in a situation where there's a group of people you have at least one thing in common. They like to jog, right? So when you start doing that, you're just putting the intention out there. I'm trying to find a new friend. I want a new friendship, a new relationship in my life. And so you got to put yourself in the position where you're going to find those people, and you want to be, you know, aligned, at least on some level, like, so you've got certain things in common. So that's what I would say, and it feels really weird. And, one of the reasons I wrote this book is, as you know, I'm a therapist, and in the classic world of therapy, there is individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, but there's no such thing as friendship therapy. And, while I'm not necessarily advocating for friend couples to run out and get a therapist to help them solve their problems, although I don't think that's a bad idea, um, what it means to me is there's no language out there in the zeitgeist of how to navigate conflict in these relationships, right? And so we've talked about a lot of examples here where you feel like you're in a conflictual state with a friend but don't know how to get out of it, right? So there's no language around navigating conflict, and there's no blueprint for how to get out of a bad relationship or to get into a new good relationship. And so that's why it feels so awkward, because nobody's talking about these things. Nobody knows really what are the generally expected rules of how to navigate these relationships. And so, when I was being interviewed and I was talking about the dog park situation, and the person that I was talking to was like, "So what do you mean? You just go up and be like, start talking to them, and then you'd be like, 'Well, hey, would you like to go to coffee at some point?'" And I was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Wouldn't you do that if you were trying to date the person, or they would ask you?" And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, you're not looking to sign up for life and share finances and kids with a friend, so it's not exactly, apples to apples, but if you want a relationship, go out and get it,
Mhm.
right? Stop waiting for these relationships to happen to you, right? Then you're operating out of a position of being passive. You never wanna be that. You wanna be taking action, making decisions, thoughtful decisions, and then taking action around them. So, yeah, it's gonna feel weird because we don't talk about this and nobody does it like that. But yeah, if you want a friend, go out and get one. Put it out there that you want a friend. What's the worst thing that's gonna happen? The person's gonna be like, "Oh, weirded out," and like, "Oh, I don't know." Probably won't happen like that. They're probably like, "Oh, sure."
Yeah, and people are a lot more open to, like, making new friends than you
Yeah,
think.
exactly.
But one of my biggest pet peeves
Right.
is people complaining all the time with no solution. And I'm like, "What? If you were complaining about having no friends, have you invited a single person to go do anything in the past 6 months? No,
Totally,
probably not."
and that's
So,
why it always starts with your own behavior. It's
yes.
right? It's always like, "Nobody's," "I don't have this person in my life. Nobody's asking me to do things." Well, when's the last time you asked somebody to do things? When's the last time you put yourself in a position where you could really, activate new people in your life? It's gotta start with you.
And also, just think about how, like, most people, like, you wanna be the person who's asked, you don't wanna be the person who's
Right.
doing the
Right.
asking, right? And then think about, like, when you're so scared of if you are the person who is so scared of asking, that person is probably gonna be grateful that you were the one who did it.
Totally.
And so, like, flip the narrative of, like, "Oh, they don't wanna do anything or they're gonna think I'm weird," to them being like, "Oh, thank God you're the one who said something," you
Right.
know?
And we have to change this mindset of not taking risks and not taking chances, and for expecting life or in this case friendships to happen to you. You need to happen to life and to friendships. Period.
Yep.
So this idea that, and I get it, of course it's nice to be asked to do something. Of course, that feels good. You feel wanted and desired, and that's good. And by the way, when you look overall, there should be like an equal distribution of like being asked and asking, right? So when you're feeling like, oh, I wish that that person would ask me, just know that you want to strike a balance here. And so ask them, right? And pay attention to when you're being asked, but also pay attention to how many times you've asked. And often that number, way smaller than the amount of invitations you've received. And you're out of whack.
Mhm.
That's that relationship or those relationships happening to you. You need to happen to them if you want them to have any kind of life, energy, and longevity.
What do you do if you feel like you're the friend who's always inviting people to do things, but
Mhm.
they're never inviting you?
Yeah, that's gotta be a conversation, you know? And it doesn't mean a breaking up conversation, it's an awareness. It's like, let's bring awareness to what's happening here. I feel like I'm always the one instigating hanging out, and I wonder this to myself sometimes, if I didn't instigate, would we just never see each other? That doesn't feel good. And so I just wanted to bring it to both of our attention. Is there something going on here? Is it just that I'm the one that's always asking so you don't feel compelled to ask? Because that's also too, again, bring it back to you. Are they not asking you because they know you're going to ask them, right? Have you given them enough space to put the invite to you, or are you always there trying to manage and organize the friendship? We'll do this, this week, and in 2 weeks we'll do that, so you have to give them a little space also to operate, and that might be what comes out in the conversation that you have. "Oh, well, you're so on it. I feel like you're the social coordinator for this relationship. Okay, but I'm not comfortable being that anymore." And it's partially me, I know, just being always, like, on it and inviting, but as I said, like, I just feel like, "Man, if I didn't invite, would we even have a friendship anymore?" And so I wanted that kind of hurts me thinking, "And is that true, and what can we do about it?"
That's like the perfect script.
Well, there are scripts in the book.
Yes.
Literal conversation starters. I mean, not that one particularly, but, um, because it's hard. Again, like these types of conversations are not out there, and
Mhm.
they're just not out there, and that's the whole purpose of the book is, like, let's get them out here, and here's literally how to start this conversation, and that conversation, and that conversation. So that it stops feeling so weird and foreign and awkward and uncomfortable, and so we stop accepting less than we should.
No, so helpful. Okay, I wanna talk about how your earliest friendships
Mhm.
impact your current friendships.
Yes. So again, starting with the self, it's really important when you're starting to just do this work at the beginning, to look at your first friendships. How were you socialized by your parents? How were you socialized by the school or schools you went to? And how did you just show up in the world in these relationships? And often when you look at that, you start to have this kind of formula and go, ah, it makes a lot of sense why I operate in my relationships right now, and some of that information is really like, that you get is really good, and it's like, "Oh, yes, I have this strong friendship trait because of XYZ. I have this da, da, da." Like, you're a very social person, you just said, and you're the coordinator. Looking back on, is that how I originally started as a person, or was that how I was socialized? Like, was my mom or was my dad really social and always throwing parties? Or, you know, um things like that, good, and I talk about this in the book, like, I had a mom that was very social and was always throwing dinner parties, and I just thought that was the way to it you know, that's the way one should show up in life. In fact, I took it to the extreme where I co-founded a company called Leaf TV, which is all about, or at least a large part was all about, being social and putting on the perfect dinner party and et cetera, and I started to realize I was so exhausted all the time, and I was like, "Why am I so exhausted all the time?" And I had this epiphany, Because I'm not really that social. I'm actually an introvert, which is true, right? I have some extrovert tendencies, but I'm very fundamentally an introvert. And how come I'm out here putting on these dinner parties and literally founding a company, doing all this? And when I look back, I said, oh, because that's the way I thought it should be, because that's the way my mom was. But that's not true to the core of who I was. I just never stopped to look at the core of who I was. And so when we look back, it's really important to separate how we were socialized versus how we were just really born into the world. And and maybe some of that stuff is for good and maybe some of the stuff is for bad. So if you are feeling like, for example, in therapy there's this thing called attachment theory.
I
And
love attachment theory.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of for anybody listening that doesn't know, it's like when you're born and were first born into the world, ideally, you wanna have a secure attachment, and that means a caregiver or 2 caregivers, mom or dad or mom and mom or whoever, so a family member, is really there for the child, meeting all of the basic needs in the sense that, like, they're always being fed when they're hungry, they're always being held when they're scared or crying, they're always so basically meeting basic but profound needs, um, while the child is developing basically up until about age 5. I mean, it's good if it continues, your whole life, but those major development years up until age 5. And that's called a secure attachment. And that's where you wanna that's like the most ideal situation. And that person usually operates pretty healthily in all of their relationships. I mean, nobody gets it perfect, but they have a really solid grounding. They feel safe and protected within relationships. If you do not have the benefit of having, those people in your lives, and, for example, if there's any sort of abuse or trauma and needs are not being met, you can have a very insecure attachment, right? And so you can show up even though outwardly you feel like you trust people, subconsciously you don't. And so you're bringing a lot of anxiety and angst, you can be, into your relationships. And so it's really important to look at, um, just exactly how you were brought into the world. There's another thing called an avoidant attachment, which means you probably had a caregiver or 2 that were there, and they were meeting basic physical needs, but emotionally, like, and this can happen if a mother or father is severely depressed, right? If, like, there's severe postpartum depression, for example. So the mom is there, she's meeting physical needs, like baby's being fed, but emotionally, they cannot connect to the baby. So the baby can be avoidant in the sense of, like, they're there, but they're not really there, right? And so looking at how you were brought up and brought into the world also can really give a lot of information. And we talk a lot about this in couples therapy where you're looking at, and that's how you are interacting with a romantic couple, but it's just as true within these friend groups. So really understanding how you were socialized and then kind of what your attachment style is, um, can really help bring information and value. And again, this is about the self, but like how you're showing up in relationships. And could I be showing up in a better and different way or a healthier way? And we all could be showing up a little bit better, and that's, what I talk a lot about it in the book. So even if you think you're the greatest friend alive, there's probably a lot of stuff that that we could be doing better.
Oh, absolutely. I love attachment theory. I learned about it in 2020. I also, I love personality tests. I'm
Yeah.
a 3 in Enneagram, I love all that
Right.
stuff,
Yeah.
but the attachment theory test and just everything behind
Yeah.
it helped me learn the most about myself than
Exactly.
anything has. The
Right.
book Attached, if in a dating way, is really
Yeah.
helpful,
Yeah.
um,
Totally. It's great.
but I didn't even think about it in regards to friendship, which is so crazy
Right.
because I'm so into that
That's
stuff, but
right.
I'm so in my friends are my favorite part of my life.
Right.
So it is crazy that I didn't even think about it in that
That's right,
aspect.
and that's the point of this book is to draw awareness because we've got so much I was being interviewed, and I think I said this on the Skinny Confidential
Mhm.
podcast that you watched, but by Maria Menounos, and Maria, at the end of the interview, was like, "Okay, Erin, I have this friend, and we've made plans, like, no joke, 10 times, over the course of the last 2 years, and concrete plans, date, place, time. And without fail, the night before or the morning of, I get a text from the friend canceling. And she goes, "Look, look, look." Look." She holds the phone. And I scroll through. I go, "Yeah, that's definitely true." She goes, "What do I do with this friend?" And I said, "Maria, I've got news for you. You're not in a friendship with this person. Okay? There is an imbalance of expectation. You're in some kind of weird relationship, but it is not a friendship because this friend is not showing up for you. This friend is not committed to this relationship. And it might not be personal. She might be going through a lot of other stuff, but the casualty is this friendship. And I said, let's look at it a different way. If this were a guy that you just started dating or a romantic partner that you just started dating and they canceled not one, not two, and she said, no, 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 they'd be done. I was like, exactly. You would never have let this get to 10 times being canceled. Why are we doing this? Because we're not applying what we know relationally with romantic relationships or family relationships to the friendship group. And so we're tolerating so much stuff that we would never otherwise tolerate just because, again, it's just not out there in the zeitgeist to have these kind of boundaries and um, and awareness about these relationships and how we're operating in them.
I had a friendship coach on maybe a year and a half ago, and she was giving us some sort of study and giving us stats on
Okay.
something. And my best friend was on with me.
Uh-huh.
And there was some study that was like the 12 most important qualities in a friend.
Right.
And one of them was self confidence,
Right.
which was so interesting
Yeah.
because before that, I wouldn't have agreed. But then I was like, that makes complete sense because
Yeah.
it's all about yourself.
Of
And
course.
then, I mean, obviously, insecurity is just,
Yeah,
it's
you have
unhealthy and
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But it was so interesting. Are there any other qualities in a friendship that you think makes a good friend that maybe wouldn't be as obvious?
Well, I think the thing is that you really want number 1, what you really need to look for is when you're looking at your group of friends, is you need to make sure it's great, and I talk about this in the book, it's really great to have friends who know where you came from, who've kind of seen who you are at various, especially younger versions of yourself, right? And it's nice to have friends that have a ton in common with you because it feels like you don't have to explain anything. They can finish your sentences. You
Mhm.
really feel like you can be yourself and you're seen and heard in these relationships. But what you don't want to have is an echo chamber. You don't want to have created a group of people that all have
Yes, man.
yeah, yes men, and people that all kind of
Oh, same opinions. Yeah.
think like you and and operate in the world like you. You wanna make sure they have the same core values. That is absolutely important. You never wanna compromise on core values. If you have different core values, this is never gonna work, and you've gotta ask yourself what kind of trade you're doing to be in this relationship. It's not good. So you wanna have the same core values, but what you wanna actively be doing, and I think is seeking out friendships with people that have a very different either upbringing or, religion or sexual identity, and it's not about going out and finding a token gay friend. That's not what this is about. It's about energetically being curious about people living different lives than you. And because the more you open up your aperture, on who you are curious about and want to spend time with, the more you develop as a person because those relationships open up parts of yourselves that you could never otherwise open up on your own or through somebody that had just had the exact same kind of life experience as you, right? And so I think that's one of a really great thing to do, somebody a different age than you, right? We're talking about the 20s, but having a good friend that's like maybe 10 years older than you or even 20 years older than you, and that doesn't mean that you're seeing them every week. There's a ton of wisdom there, right, that you can learn from.
Mhm.
Or maybe having a friend that's 5 or 6 years younger than you. You could show up for that in that friendship in a different role, right? So you're expanding your own who you are and your abilities and your capabilities and your view of the world expands with when you have people that are you know, different from you. It's a much more dynamic experience. So that's kind of one thing that I think that people don't think of. But I also think we need to be really careful about how much net I think the best relationships you leave feeling positive. And that doesn't I don't mean happy, but you feel a positive energy. So often and especially coming out of COVID, it's just been such a, and we've had it just we like, we've had like the greatest hits just going like pre-COVID and after, a lot going on in the global landscape
Yeah.
that is dark and depressing. Um, so it's easy to lean into that, right? But what can happen is that starts to be driving the friendships is feeling kind of what we talked about at the beginning, negativity, darkness, and it feels kind of comfortable and safe, but you wanna make sure that not these every relationship you feel positive and energized in. And it's really and that goes right to self-confidence, right? Also, like feeling like the best version of yourself in this relationship. And that doesn't mean you're happy all the time. That means you can cry. That means you can be depressed. That means you can have anxiety. But those are just not the things that are leading in that friendship, right? That's not the dynamic that's leading. You want to feel whole and seen and confident. And those are the relationships you want to seek out and really nurture and foster.
That was so helpful. Thank you so much. I've
Yes.
loved this
Oh,
episode.
thank you. Me too.
So good. Okay, can you let the listeners know where they can find you and buy the book?
Sure. So the book is available wherever you buy books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and a ton of indie bookstores. And you can find me at Erin Falconer or at Pick the Brain on all things social.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know by giving it a nice thumbs up and subscribe for more.